Welcome to everyone. See you all trickling in. Welcome to those who are able to join live this evening. So wonderful to have you here. I'm just making sure our chat is working. So, to give it an opportunity for those who are joining live, welcome. If you are watching this over a recording, I hope that you're able to take it slowly, pause when you need to, and really allow the information to sink in. If you are watching it again, I encourage you to do the same. And so, just want to welcome you all to this webinar on nurturing communication and connection for couples. I just want to take an opportunity to check in and see where everyone is coming from this evening. It's also a really wonderful way for me to test the chat. So throw in the chat if you can. If you're all settled in, where are you coming from? Are you in Eastern time? Did it snow like crazy out of nowhere today for you? Please let me know. Hopefully you can all get in there. There we go. So it looks like the chat is disabled, but you can go through the Q&A, which is wonderful. So if you can type in through the Q&A, please feel free to do that. We'll be looking over some questions later on as well. Welcome from Cambridge. Hello, welcome from Ottawa, Oakville. A resident of Ottawa for a very long time. Very dear to my heart. Vaughan, Peterborough, small town near London. Hello. From Toronto, welcome. Pontypool, I'm not sure that I've ever heard of that, but welcome, Mrs. Saga. So coming from all over, how many of you got snow today? It was quite a shocker. I just returned from the US over March break, and I hate to say it, I may have jinxed us and brought back the snow. So welcome to everyone who's here. So happy to have you attend. We obviously have a lot to cover. We're here for an hour together. I'm going to get right into it. We'll kind of talk a little bit about what to expect this evening, and talk about the format as well. So please feel free to pop in any questions and we will get started. So I'm going to go ahead and just start with the agenda. I like to know what I'm getting into, so I'm just going to go ahead and lay it out for everyone who's here. So it's a really challenging period of time that we're in. Chances are, if you're here this evening, something hasn't quite fit perfectly in your relationship. You've probably experienced some difficulty in the last little while, and recognizing that in starting a family and in growing your family, your relationship changes quite a bit. We're going to talk a little bit about how did we get here? Is this natural? Is it just us? We're going to answer all those really important questions that I often hear from my clients and just from people in general. We're going to talk about how relationships change. So yes, we know that they change, but what does that look like exactly? So that you know, and if you're questioning in your mind, does this fit within the realm of the changes? We'll get into all of that. What exactly leads to disconnection? What are the key elements of satisfied relationships? So over here, what leads us to feel disconnected? What leads us to experience that tension? And on the other hand, what are the key elements that lead to satisfaction? How to be your own relationship guide and how to assess what is going well and what isn't. Some strategies and skills, which I'm sure you're all very excited about. And then what supports are available to couples and which ones are right. We will spend some time at the end and leave a lot of space for questions. So if you have some questions, you can either throw them in there into the Q&A, or you can hold on to them. So if, as we go along, if there's a piece of information that I'm sharing with you, or a concept or a skill or something you're really wondering about, please feel free to hold on to that and ask at the end. So we will absolutely have lots of time to talk about anything that isn't making sense for you, isn't sitting right, or if there is something that you want to ask anonymously that might also pertain to the rest of the group about how this relates to your relationship, please feel free to do so. That is a big reason why we are here. So again, I'm so excited. You probably hear me say that a lot. Working with couples is one thing that really, really lights me up in my work. And so I am so happy that you are here prioritizing your relationship, taking that leap. While I understand that there isn't a lot of commitment in coming to a free webinar, it is still your time. I recognize it's late. I recognize that you don't have a lot of space and energy for these kinds of things, but something brought you here. And so I just want to recognize that part of you that brought you here. And my hope is that by the end of this, there will be more hope and possibility infused into yourself, your partner, and how you feel about your relationship moving forward. So I'm going to dive right in and then I will introduce myself and to make sure we dust all the cobwebs off and keep awake at this hour. And if you need some coffee, please feel free. If you need something to keep you comfy, to keep you awake, if you need to get up and stretch, do whatever you need to do. I recognize it's late. So the all-important question, is it just us? I met with a couple recently who went on Instagram and said, I see all these couples online. I see friends, I see influencers, I see people locally who I might know who just look like they have it together. They're in the thick of parenting. They still look so connected. Everything looks easy. Everything flows. Is it just us? And so this is here to let you know it's not. 67% of couples experience a decline in relationship satisfaction in becoming parents. So what does that mean exactly? Within the first year of becoming parents, there is a very sharp decline. This also means that there is a decline in physical touch and intimacy. And as you can probably imagine, conflict rises and increases exponentially. So most people who become parents really have a hard time maintaining this sense of it's you and me against the world, which is what helps us to feel satisfied in relationships, right? It's a big life change. If for some reason you're watching this and it hasn't impacted you all that much, please feel free to email me. I have so many questions. Chances are it has impacted you. And so we know from the research from Dr. John Gottman, who's a marital specialist, did a massive, massive study and noticed that 67% of couples reported a significant decline in satisfaction. So it's not just you. It is a really, really tumultuous time in our lives, which is why we need so much support. When they say it takes a village, it not only takes a village to raise a child, it takes a village to help the couple maintain that sense of connection. And so why? Why is there such a decline, right? What leads to this disconnection? A big part of it is our mental health. So mental health, what we know from the studies is that mental health is directly correlated to satisfaction in relationships. What do I mean by that? It means that the state of your mental health impacts how you feel about yourself, about one another, and really your ability to support one another. So I'm wondering if I throw in the chat, I want you to think about a day where both you and your partner were struggling and you still had to parent, or you still had to clean the house, or you still had those big responsibilities. When one or both of you were not optimal, when you were both suffering, how did you communicate with one another? How connected did you feel? Did that impact how you interacted on that day? If you can think about something recent, throw it in there. Let me know. Did it impact you? Did you notice the difference? I absolutely notice the difference anytime both of us are struggling. So please feel free to throw it in the chat. I'm going to continue here. So what do we know about mental health in the perinatal period? We know that 1 in 5 childbearing partners experience PMAD. So that is our wonderful new acronym to sort of symbolize postpartum and even prenatal mood and anxiety disorders. So we're talking about depression, anxiety, things like OCD, panic disorders, things like post-traumatic stress that can come from a traumatic birth or a traumatic pregnancy. And so we know that the numbers are quite high. 1 in 5 childbearing partners experience a PMAD in prenatally or postpartum. I'm going to jump to the third statistic here for a second. So let's say I'm diagnosed with postpartum anxiety. That means that my partner's risk of also developing a postpartum mood or anxiety disorder increases by 50%. Most people don't talk about this. Most of my clients who I see day in and day out don't realize this. And so they come to me and they begin to talk about symptoms and signs that they notice in their partner. And we begin to expand the conversation and become curious about what is the state of your partner's mental health. So we know that especially in heterosexual relationships, men really go unseen and undiagnosed. They are underdiagnosed when really their risk is quite high. And so 1 in 10 non-childbearing partners experience PMADs. That statistic is probably much lower, right? Because the reporting is much lower and diagnosis is much lower than it probably is. So those numbers are probably a little bit off. But the idea here is that if we're all suffering, it's very difficult to feel satisfied and grounded in our relationship. And so what does this mean? How does that change our relationship? What do we begin to notice? How does our relationship shift over time? And why is it that we are experiencing these things? Why are we experiencing this disconnection? Why are we at higher risk of mental health concerns in the perinatal period? Well, I'm sure it comes as no surprise to you that a few things change in relationships. So number one, priorities change. So typically, let's think back to before you had kids. How much time did you have to spend with your partner? Was it easy to go out for dinner on a whim? Did you have time to sleep in? Did you have time to really invest in those beautiful date nights? Or just sit down and focus on one another without the distraction of dinner time, bath time, bedtime, right? So our whole lifestyle changes. In addition to that, each partner's lifestyle changes a little bit. So typically the childbearing partner can become much more self-conscious of their body. They can feel easily touched out, like hands up in the chat if you feel easily touched out. And by the time your partner attempts to offer any physical touch, you are like, nope, I have had it for the day, right? Our focus and our priority becomes baby. And so our entire focus shifts, right? And so often I hear from partners, there's no space for me anymore. Baby has become the primary focus, right? And so they become sort of the supporting partner. And often the non-childbearing partner expresses, I feel like I'm useless, right? If the parent is feeding baby and changing baby and doing wake ups, what am I really doing? And so supporting partner and supporting baby doesn't always quite feel like the right fit. We begin to have lack of sleep. So again, hands up, raise your hands if you don't cope well with a lack of sleep. I always say that sleep is the gateway to everything. Yeah, absolutely, right? I see some hands going up. Sleep is the gateway to everything. I tell everyone, don't make any major decisions. Don't evaluate or worry too much about your thoughts or how you're feeling until you get a good night's sleep, right? I feel like Mary freaking Poppins when I've had a full night's sleep, as opposed to when my kiddo is waking up 4 times a night. And so we have sleep deprivation. Often we have a lack of support. There is far less intimacy. It is just natural, especially in the initial year, to have far less intimacy. And really, date nights, for the most part, don't exist. And if they do, they look a little bit different. But one of the things I sometimes task my couples with is, can you go out on a date night and not talk about your baby? And they look at me like a deer in headlights because you don't have anything to talk about anymore other than your baby. And so things change significantly in that initial year, and certainly even further in those initial 3 years. And it really leads to this strong disconnection. So I have a question for you. And again, raise your hand if you have thought since becoming a parent, or if you are even in the process of becoming a parent and you're consumed with it, have you ever wondered, can we get back to who we were? Or wished for, I just want to get back to us. Does that statement resonate with you? It is one I hear in almost every individual and couple session I conduct. It is such, and so I'm seeing some hands being raised. It is such a strong wish, such a strong yearning for most couples. We don't feel like ourselves anymore. Our lives have changed, and often we recognize for the better, and yet there are such significant elements about who we were individually and who we were as a couple that just feel out of reach. And so we often find ourselves yearning and longing for this time where we felt more connected. So I'm wondering, does it feel like we can create, that you and your partner can create a new connection, a new you moving forward without feeling too overwhelmed? I ask this question because most often I hear, and again, raise your hand if this resonates, I want to work on my relationship, but I'm too tired. I want to work on my relationship, but I have no energy. I want to work on my relationship, but when and how? I want to work on my relationship, but my partner's not interested, right? I feel like I'm doing all the work, or it just feels too overwhelming and I have no idea where to start, right? It's going to take up too much time and space and energy. It's going to be too challenging. I won't hold myself accountable. It's never going to work. So my hope is that you will feel more understood, more connected with one another while taking very little of your time and energy. This is absolutely false. And so I want to dispel this right away. We don't need a lot of time and energy. We don't need the big dates. We don't need anything super luxurious or complicated or complex to shift how we feel in our relationship. And so we're going to get into how we do this while having so little time and energy and already feeling like we're on autopilot, barely getting through our day. Okay. Now, why don't I introduce myself? We're going to do all of this, but it might be helpful to know who is sitting in front of you. So for those of you who recognize me, who are potentially familiar with Bloom Psychotherapy, who have worked with me before, I welcome you back. It's so lovely to have you here. For those of you who are new faces here, my name is Carrie-Lynn Adam. I am a social worker and psychotherapist. I'm a couples therapist and perinatal mental health specialist. As you can probably see, I'm also a mom of two, as well as a mom to a fur baby who fully attempts to bulldoze these two. And I work at this wonderful practice, this beautiful collective of women who are also perinatal mental health specialists who are supporting the perinatal community in providing individual couples and group support to the perinatal community all over Canada. More specifically, Ontario most often and out east, but certainly we provide on a broader spectrum. And I want to, now I recognize, I just finished saying to you that a mom saw an Instagram photo and felt, sort of like this imposter syndrome in her own relationship, or felt sort of disconnected, like I don't look anything like that, or it must be the only one who doesn't look super happy. So I put this picture here with purpose. I want to explain to you a little bit about what happened behind the scenes, not specifically with this photo shoot, but how we got here. As I mentioned, I'm a mom of two. And a little fun fact, my partner is also a social worker. And so if we go back almost 10 years, we were deep in the throes of being new parents, and there was a lot of postpartum anxiety, and there was a lot of sleep deprivation, and there was a big lack of support because we were on our own in Toronto with no family around. And we were new parents, and it was all very overwhelming. And so we didn't feel connected. And quite often, and I'm sure you can all resonate with this, Tell me if this sounds familiar. Raise your hand if this sounds familiar. We argued a lot, and we were really deeply connected before kids. We had 6 solid years before we had kids. And then suddenly we argued about who got the least amount of sleep, who was the most tired, who was probably or should be more responsible for baby, who should cook dinner, who needed a break more, when were we going to sleep, who was responsible for wake ups and diaper changes. And we felt deeply misunderstood and completely unappreciated, right? We would do all of these big gestures, and it ended up being a lot of a competition. There was less physical touch, there was less intimacy, there was less opportunity to exist outside of just attempting to survive those initial months of parenting. And the interesting piece is we were both social workers who missed it. We missed the signs of postpartum mental health. We missed that while it was common to experience this disconnection as a couple, that it wasn't normal, and that if we sought support sooner, it might be really helpful in resolving that and kind of bringing us back together as a team. And so we had this running joke in our relationship, which is both funny and not funny, that one day we woke up when we slept for a long period of time and when we felt like we had a handle on it. And we went, oh, we don't want to separate. Like, we actually really like each other. We hadn't slept in a long time. And so we were prepared. We were a little bit more prepared the second time around. But one thing that really propelled me to focus completely on working with parents was this. It was not only that I had already focused so much of my career on supporting families, but it was also my own experience, because here I was in the field with all the training, with all the knowledge, and still suffering and still missing it. And so while I could spew all sorts of things and will give you a snippet of some of my qualifications, what I really want you to know is that I've been there. And so I'm not here to tell you that it's easy or that you can do this from a place of not having done it, or from a place of not having felt what you feel, from feeling like I can barely survive the day. Where is this time? I get that. I need you to know I get that. And so I have worked throughout my entire career. Again, I'm going to age myself a little bit here. I started in 2006 working in addictions and mental health. And for those of you who are coming from Ottawa, I worked for 5 years at Shepherds of Good Hope, which is a homeless shelter. And I worked in addictions and mental health. And so one thing I'd like you to know about me as a practitioner is my question to, my work is, what am I missing? And so what I heard all the time in addictions and mental health is the parents. I got here, I began to struggle, my mental health, sort of declined. I developed addiction because I had this really traumatic childhood. And when I dug deeper, the traumatic childhood often was about the state of the parents. They didn't feel supported. They didn't know how to do things. They didn't have the resources to parent well. And so over my career, I continued to sort of pull away and take a different view. So for most of my career, for the last 12 years, I have worked with children, their parents as couples, individually, providing family sessions, providing parenting support, working really closely with the city of Toronto to develop screeners and how to appropriately assess screeners and ensure that they were treated appropriately so that kids weren't being taken into care. And fast forward to 2020, I made the leap to join this beautiful practice with Bloom Psychotherapy to do this full time. And so I have been working exclusively with individuals and couples, doing both therapy and group work in the perinatal community, because I believe strongly that, for one, if you're only working with the individual, with the mom, with the dad, you're missing a big part of the picture. For two, when couples feel connected and strong, so do kids. And three, there just aren't enough services and supports that are specialized to our community. And so this is why I'm so passionate about the work. So I've trained in level 1 and 2 of the Gottman method of couples therapy. I'm a Gottman Leader for the 7 Principles for Making Marriage Work Couple workshop. I'm very, very, very passionate, as I mentioned. Told you were going to get a good feel for how excited I was about this work, to work with couples, especially around sex and intimacy, couples experiencing fertility, couples who have one partner who's experiencing a PMAD and the other one who isn't entirely familiar with mental health or how to support someone with mental health concerns, infidelity, and just kind of like recovering as a whole in parenting. I also want to mention my partner and I have been together for 17 years. We've been married for 11, and we use these skills all the time. So one thing I want to impart: there is no perfect marriage. There is no perfect relationship, and signs of conflict or difficulty in communication aren't necessarily signs that your relationship is in trouble. That happens to everyone. And so no one is invincible, but we are going to get into how to feel better when these things come up, how to ensure that they're not explosive, and how to recover. Okay, so here's what we're going to get into. Now that we know why it's happening, now that we know how our relationship changes, now that we understand that we are so desperate to get to this new place where we feel connected, we're going to stop doing a few things. One of the number one, in fact, the number one, and I'm curious, again, if you can type it into the Q&A section, what do you think is the number one? Actually, I'm curious, you can even put thumbs up. Thumbs up if you think that sex and intimacy is the number one reason people reach out for couples therapy. Got a couple of raised hands, yeah. Thumbs up if you think communication, how we communicate, how we approach conflict is the number one reason people reach out for couples therapy or groups. I see a lot more hands here. So it is the number one reason people reach out for couples therapy. I want to focus on communication. The tricky part, and this is what I'm encouraging you to stop, we're also going to go over what's not working. Stop focusing on the wrong thing. So one of the things we talked about was how to assess in the agenda, how to assess what's really going on. So often when we think about communication, when we have that tunnel vision of it's just communication, we miss all these other pieces. And about 95% of the time, communication cannot be directly addressed without addressing some of the underlying causes. There's a sort of rule of thumb. If it's communication, it's likely that we need to go back to strengthening the foundation of our relationship. And we're going to talk about that a little bit more. Stop attempting to fix on your own. So what do I mean by that? If you are attending individual therapy and attempting to work through your couple's issues there, it's not going to work. It might be effective in addressing how you approach your relationship, but without your partner there, it's not going to work. If you look online, if you read the book, that's great. My question to you is, did your partner read the book? Do you both have the same language? How are you implementing it? How are you keeping yourselves accountable? How are you explaining it? How are you each understanding what you've just read? Are you reading the same information? Does it work for your relationship? And stop using time and energy as a reason to avoid the work. I know this one is difficult to hear, but I'm just going to call you all out on it. If you're here tonight, it means that you have the time and energy. And we're going to talk a little bit about what that looks like. So how do we do this? Instead of doing the things that I just mentioned, we learn how to assess what's going well and what needs attention. So not every area of your relationship, though it may feel like it at times, not every area of your relationship needs work. We also want to make sure that if we, again, see it as communication, what do we actually need to work on? What are the building blocks to getting to communication? Involve your partner in making a commitment and engage together. Take part in something that keeps you both accountable and engaged. Again, one of the number one reasons that people reach out for group work is they need the accountability. If they don't have it booked in their schedule, it's not happening. They're going to end up on the couch falling asleep. Thumbs up if you resonate with that. So I want to give you some hope because you're probably thinking, okay, that sounds nice. It's probably not going to work for us for this reason, this reason, this reason, and this reason. And so I imagine that at this point, you may be sort of sitting there, coming up with a list of all the reasons why beyond tonight, you don't have the time and space. It's not going to work for you. It's not for you and your partner. So I just want to highlight a couple of things for you, okay? So when couples engage in ongoing work that feels easy and not time consuming, I'm going to give you an example. So I can't get very specific due to confidentiality, but I want to share and sort of highlight some of the typical couples that I see. Partners are not on board to engage in any sort of couples work. So a big reason why people come to group is because, and even getting them there sometimes is like pulling teeth, is one partner's like, no, I don't know. Some partners think like, if I'm going to couples work, we're probably on the brink of divorce. If I'm going to couples work, everyone's going to blame me. If I'm going to couples work, it's going to be too much work and I'm not interested. And so conflict, so one, there was a disengaged partner. Two, conflict often resulted in criticism and defensiveness, right? Thumbs up if that happens to you. One person feels criticized, one person feels defensive, right? And you just kind of go back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. But both partners obviously felt disconnected. When they engaged in couples work, they learned the same language to describe their experience as well as the same strategies and skills. The disengaged partner after being engaged was the partner to initiate the skills and strategies, and communication and connection improved. There is no better foreplay, there is no better compliment, there's no better way of connection when a disengaged partner initiates, hey, let's work on our relationship. Hey, let's repair in this way. Hey, let's use the language, right? And so this is what happened. And this is not just this couple. This is a representation of many couples. I have yet to have a disengaged partner join some sort of program or workshop or therapy and come out continuing to feel disengaged. Here's another type of couple. Partners identify communication as the main concern, as I talked about. But when they engaged differently, they were able to assess and address the underlying causes of what communication, why they were feeling misunderstood, why they were feeling underappreciated, why they were leading to conflict. And so they focused on strengthening the foundation of the relationship first. Afterward, they learned to fill their emotional bank account in daily, small, easy ways and felt better understood, appreciated, and heard. I want to take a second to explain what the emotional bank account means. If you think about your relationship, and so this is your first skill, I want you to think about moving forward that you have an emotional relationship bank account. I want you to think about it in the same way that you would a financial bank account. If I don't make deposits into my bank account at my financial institute, and I make purchases, I make withdrawals, I go into overdraft. Never feels good to go into overdraft. Our relationships are not all that different. So when people often talk about, we just fight so easily, my partner is so defensive, is so shut off. What I often ask is, what has your connection looked like prior to bringing up the really hard topics? So we want to be making small yet really meaningful deposits in our bank account so that when tough conversations arise, we have something to withdraw from. So think about things that you can do each day with your partner, and we'll get into that a little more. It can be like offering some appreciation, some small gesture to let them know that you're thinking about them, expressing yourself in a kind way, right? It can be something really small. It can be that little physical touch, interacting without devices in front of us. And so each time we fill the emotional bank account, dates can also be included here, we make those deposits, and that communication and that conflict management is much easier because we have something to withdraw from. So rather than working on communication directly, we worked on all these other areas to practice how to communicate differently. So why is putting your relationship last not working? Again, thumbs up if you identify with, I'm really focused on raising my kids. I really want to raise them differently than I was raised. They are my priority. As long as I raise them well, the relationship can fix itself later. That's less of a priority. Raising my child and how I interact with my child is priority number one. Why is this not helpful? So why do you think? I want you to think about this for a minute. Why do you think And I'm not suggesting that child development isn't helpful or the way in which you parent isn't effective. But if you are only doing that, if you are only buying the parenting courses and the parenting books and spending all of your time scrolling, checking out those Instagram videos on how to manage a toddler tantrum differently, I'm going to ask you to pay attention to the next slide. Children who grow up in homes where parents are disconnected, you don't even need to be yelling or fighting with one another. They are visualizing the differences between your language and your body language. And so when they see these discrepancies, that still creates inner turmoil for children. And this is evidence-based. This is not my opinion. Children who grow up in homes where there is tension or disconnection between parents have lower IQs. They struggle with emotional regulation. And here's a fun one for you, for anyone who goes to the gym or is focused on healthy eating. Couples who are tense and disconnected have lower immune systems and live an average of 6 to 8 years less than those who are in satisfied relationships. You could skip every day at the gym this week and focus on your relationship, and you'd be way ahead. These are the stats. So this is not working, right? Leaving your relationship until last. If parenting, if your children are your priority, working on your relationship is just as important as everything else you're doing for your child. So what is working? Okay, Carrie-Lynn, you've told us all the things, right? Not working, it's looking pretty bleak. And these things aren't working. And now I need to focus on my relationship and I'm really tired. And what do I do? So what do we know is working? And I just want to preface this with, I've trained in other modalities for couples as well. I've trained in EFT and I've trained in Gottman. And so what I know is that the Gottman Institute is backed by decades and decades of research with over 4,000 couples with extensive blood work, urine, Holter monitors, observation, everything you can imagine. And so what they found in these 40 years of research with couples, because they saw them 10 years apart, is that they could identify the key predictors of divorce. They could also identify the 7 essential skills that help prevent marital breakdown. So they looked at, there are these 7 ways that if couples engage, and here's the beautiful part, you only need to engage in them about 70% of the time to feel satisfied in relationships. And they're not rocket science. That's the beauty of them. So they help prevent, and they can also turn around. So if you're already there and you're like, whoa, this is me, right? I have some of those key predictors. It can also shift the relationship. They can identify what leads to marital or maintain satisfaction. So not only that, but it helps couples to assess, like, what are we doing right? What are we doing wrong? If this is happening, where do we need to go with it? And we can easily focus on the areas that create tension. So you'll notice here there's a diagram. And so this is the real approach to Gottman. Whether you're in couples therapy or you're in a workshop, there are these 7 principles. And you can see them here. What I want to draw your attention to are the load-bearing walls. So I want you to think of this exactly like a house. As I mentioned, if you're coming for communication, which I know you were tonight, part of it is rebuilding the foundation. If you think about your own house, if the windows are broken and the foundation has a crack in it, which are you going to repair first? You're going to go for your foundation. The same goes with the relationship, right? So think about communication as a cracked window, and think about your friendship and who you are as people, how you attune to one another, how well you know one another, how well you can depend on one another as the foundation of your relationship. How deeply do you understand one another? The load-bearing walls are all about trust and commitment. So trust is a lot about how well can I pick up on my partner's cues? How do I know that my partner is there for me, right? That they are ready and willing to offer empathy, that they are ready and willing to create this safe emotional space for me to talk about any struggles that I have. And the commitment piece of that is, are they showing me day to day that they continue to show up for me, that they continue to be curious about my needs and wants and how we can work together to achieve those? And so we know that this works. We know that focusing on friendship, we know that focusing on deeply appreciating one another, on understanding, on how we offer empathy and how we listen in conversation, how we offer feedback is so important. We know that how we approach conflict management rather than resolution is so important. How we compromise with one another, how we create shared meaning moving forward, because our life doesn't stop once we have the house, kids, job, right? We still want to create shared meaning moving forward. And so the 7 principles are one really wonderful, really evidence-based way of working on your relationship. So let's give a little bit of a breakdown of what that would look like if you were to be focusing on these key areas. So identifying predictors of divorce. That sounds a little bit scary, I realize, but what does this actually mean? So what it means is it helps to identify 6 main warning signs that are corrosive to your relationship. There are these signs like harsh startup, like the 4 horsemen, like body language, lack of repair, flooding. There's all sorts of them. And it also helps to identify the antidote. So they're not just talking about here are all the ways, they're saying here's what you can do immediately to create a change, right? And improve and repair those areas of your relationship. But here's a little bit of an example. One of the signs of or predictors of divorce, and not all of them are weighed the same, but some of these, and especially if they're used often, can be quite corrosive to your relationship. So the 4 horsemen and their antidotes, criticism and defensiveness, go together like peanut butter and jelly. And so often when we criticize our partner, or we're not complaining, but we're blaming, our partner interprets that in a way that leads to defensiveness. So the antidote to criticism is to start differently, to start in a softer way and complain without blame. Defensiveness means taking responsibility where responsibility is due. So I might become defensive, but I can hear past my partner's tone and apologize and take ownership of what needs to be acknowledged. Contempt are things like eye rolling, sarcasm, and having this sort of overtone of I'm better than you. And so how do we curb that? Well, we talk about our feelings and our needs instead. So rather than talking about it in this really hostile way, we begin to focus on how we feel in the situation and what we need from our partner. And that tends to diffuse that. The final one is stonewalling, which most of you might describe as my partner just shuts down and leaves the room. Thumbs up if any of you identifies that or have a partner who identifies with that. They just leave and they don't say anything anymore and they disengage and I have to chase them sometimes and then I just never hear from them again. And so that is connected to flooding in the body. And so the antidote to that is learning how to soothe in the moment so that you can share with your partner that you need a break and come back to it when you are ready. So that's an example of some of the key predictors. Strengthening the foundation of your relationship, which is really all about friendship, which sounds so strange at this point in life, but it is equally as important. And if you think about the aspects of your closest relationships, your closest friendships, they're those key elements that are so important to you, that are likely just as important in your relationship. And so that is a big, big, big area, whether you're experiencing lack of intimacy, communication difficulty, conflict. Most of the time, it's when in doubt, go back to strengthening your foundation. And so what does that look like? Well, it looks like being curious and expanding your awareness of who you are and who your partner is now, focusing on small daily practices to express appreciation and acknowledgement for one another, learning how to combat negative sentiment override, which really means painting everything with a negative brush. The moment my partner does something I don't like, everything is negative. I can't see anything that they do well. And that doesn't really lend to feeling appreciated or understood. And it probably isn't entirely accurate either. The other thing that friendship allows us to do is be playful and have fun. And so this may sound really surprising, but there's a lot of laughter that happens in groups when couples come because they have this time, they have this dedicated time without distraction to really spend with one another and remember that they could be playful and they did have fun, but they really enjoyed each other's company. So let me ask you, in terms of friendship, And this is something you can implement right away. What did you do to have fun when you started dating? How can you implement those things right away in your life? Maybe once a week, commit to it, schedule it right now as you're watching this recording or as you're watching this live with your partner. What's one thing we used to do that we really loved that we could commit to this week or next week? Talk about what drew you to one another. What, this is something I ask of my couples all the time. Why did you connect with your partner to begin with? What core values do you share? What parts of their personality really drew you to them? We forget about these things so easily, and they're so important. And so a final key piece of what we explore in exploring the 7 principles is building the foundation of communication, conflict management, and creating shared meaning. So what does that mean? Because that is a mouthful. Communication is thinking about things like, and again, this is such an important skill. I want you to think about when you leave this workshop, how do you initiate a conversation, right? Are you looking to your partner to make sure that they're not distracted? Are you starting softly? Is it abrupt? Are you giving them warning for what you want to talk about? Are you setting, the possibility for talking about it at a later time? Are you being open and flexible? Enhancing your ability to listen and understand, so big in communication. Underneath communication is I don't feel understood or appreciated, right? And so how do we create empathy and an emotionally safe climate as we are attempting to understand our partner? So how do we do this? Ask yourself, do you listen to understand or to respond? What that means is, are you listening to your partner to really take in the information? Or are you waiting for them to stop so that you can chime in? And so if you are the latter, thumbs up if you ever listen just to respond. I can't think of a single person who doesn't from time to time. Yeah, absolutely. And so if that is you, can you practice this week listening to understand? Meaning, once my partner's done talking, I can reflect back to them. Here's what I heard you say to make sure that I got it correctly. And also practice listening without commenting or offering unsolicited advice. So, thumbs up again. How many of you love to offer that unsolicited advice? You are the solution focused person in your relationship. There's always one. And the other one likely is like, I just want you to listen. And so, this is your opportunity to practice some of those skills. Conflict management, how do we solve solvable problems? How do we manage perpetual problems? Because most conflict in relationship is perpetual, meaning it comes up over and over and over again. So if you're one of these couples who says, but we fight all the time about the same thing, I hate to break it to you, it's just a sign that you're in a relationship. How do we identify the difference between those two, and how do we move to compromise? Creating shared meaning. So the easiest way I can describe this is it doesn't just mean, a healthy relationship, a satisfied relationship is not simply the absence of conflict and the presence of skills. That's not what it looks like. And so to really create that intimacy and that me and you against the world, we really want to ask ourselves, who are we now, right? This is forging a new path for us. Who are we now? How can we accept this? How can we create plans for the future that are more realistic of the time that we're in, as opposed to longing for a time that no longer exists? So let me ask you, if nothing, and I ask this question often, and only thumbs up if you are okay with it. If nothing in your relationship changes, are you okay with that? If by the end of 2024, absolutely no aspect of your relationship has changed, are you okay with that? Now, I want to share with you, because you can't see it, there is not a single thumbs up. So that's pretty powerful. Let me ask you another question. Are you clear on what to do next? Are you still like, hands up if you're still like, that feels like a lot. What do I do now? I kind of feel like I need a little bit more support to navigate the next steps. Yeah, it's a bit overwhelming. So, do you think that having some additional support, or I might ask it differently, do you think going it on your own with just what you've received tonight, because in order to give you everything that I have would take a lot more than an hour, do you think that this will work for you on your own? Thumbs up if you're good to go. I feel great. I don't need any more support. Crickets. So, what does this mean? Is that if you are listening to this and you have not heard of our 7 Principles workshop, or you have not taken our 7 Principles workshop before, you have access to this workshop. And so I have been running this now for almost 4 years. I do not exaggerate when I say that it is probably one of the favorite parts of my work. And it is called the 7 Principles for Making Marriage Work. It is based on the Gottman method. So John Gottman, who is the founder of the Gottman Institute, has done decades and decades of research as to what makes couples have very satisfying relationships and what leads couples to separation or divorce. And so all of this material is based on this research and his methods. And fortunately for you, we have a new format. So each time I run this workshop, I ask members for feedback. What can make this workshop better? What needs to be taken out? What needs to be tweaked? And the last couple of groups were sort of unanimous in, hey, the 7 weeks is lovely. It goes by very quickly. And we feel like we need a little bit more support in order to ensure that we don't relapse, that we maintain these skills and this motivation. And so not only are we continuing to offer this wonderful workshop to all couples, we have a little bit of a new format. And so you still get the 7 weeks. It was initially 6. And again, I love that feedback. So most couples asked for 7 weeks, which is why we've extended it. So we do 7 principles over 7 weeks. Now, in addition to that, you will be receiving scheduled Q&A time with me. So while the group goes from 8 p.m. to 9:15 p.m., from 9:15 to 9:30, if you want to sign up, you and your partner can come on screen and meet with me individually. So if you have any questions about the material and you're thinking, I want to know how to use this with regard to a particular issue in our relationship, that is your opportunity to have some one-on-one time with me within the workshop. In addition, you get 3 free booster workshops that happen monthly. So what happens is the 7 weeks ends, and then for each month after, you have that wonderful accountability where we'll be working on different topics and expanding on some of the things that we weren't able to cover during the 7 weeks. So some of the previous topics are things like sex and intimacy and creating shared meaning. We will go into a little bit more what are some of the common perpetual problems that come up. So the same things that couples come to me all the time for in couples therapy, like, we fight about the same things. There are things that are difficult to manage with our in-laws, with our finances, with our parenting styles. We'll have an opportunity to cover those in more depth. So you get free workshops monthly for 3 months after you complete the 7 weeks. In addition to that, you receive a couples guide, which is really wonderful. And I've also created a little workbook to help you so that once you graduate from the program, as you're moving through the boosters, you'll have an opportunity to think about what are the principles that are most important to us? What do we want to continue working on? And what are some of those sort of like cheat sheet things that Carrie-Lynn provided for us that we really want to ensure we practice and become really skillful at. So there'll be many times throughout the workshop where I'll tell you, screenshot this. And so while the program is mostly provided by the Gottman Institute, as a couples therapist, I'd like to infuse a lot of what I use every day in some of my sessions so that you have these wonderful scripts, you have this available to you. You're not constantly having to go back to the couples guide to feel like you have exactly what you need to be skillful in your relationship.